Wedding Bells Ahead by Arleta Richardson. Chapter 5. What the Storm Revealed. Len was enthusiastic when I told him about our project. "Pa has school records for as far back as they were kept," he said. "I'm not sure how many years that is, maybe not 100, but close to it."
"I'm not going to tell the children that," I laughed. "I want them to find out as much as they can from their families. We can fill in any missing spots from the records."
"This should be interesting," Mrs. Williams said. "Maybe we'll find out who set fire to the school in 1834. As I recall, no one owned up to it then."
"You mean the school was burned down?"
I asked. "Twice," she said with a nod. "Burned down again in 1875 when Lillian and Francis were in school. We didn't know who did it that time either. Maybe your young ones will find out."
"Don't be surprised if one of them comes to you," I told her. "They're excited about gathering their information. Serena Grayson is going to talk to Augusta."
"She's tapping the right source," Mr. Williams put in. "There's nothing Augusta doesn't know. That program ought to pack the schoolhouse out." I explained to Augusta what we were doing.
"Serena wants to talk to you because your family was one of the earliest settlers in this part of Michigan, wasn't it?"
"The first, so far as I know," Augusta replied. "Not a whole lot of people were brave enough to come in here. The Chippewa Indians were hereabouts, and my pa remembered Grandpa Harris bargaining with them."
"Were you living right here when the war between the states started, Miss Harris?"
Serena asked when she came to question Augusta.
"Do you remember who was in school back then?"
"Yes, indeed," Augusta began. "Frank Gage was in the 6th grade and Ellen Gage in the 7th.
"Is that Mr. Gage, Joel's father?"
"That's right, and Frank's eldest sister kept company with my brother John. They were both out of school by the time the war started. John was 19. I half listened as Augusta continued her story, thinking how interwoven the lives were in this little community. The Laughtons and the Graysons were the only older children in school whose families didn't go back several generations. What a marvelous story it would make. I paid closer attention when I heard Augusta say, "John was afraid the North might be invaded, so before he left for war, he buried the box. Don't know what was in it, but it couldn't have been very valuable. We didn't have anything worth much except this place."
"But didn't he dig it up after the war?"
Serena wanted to know. "Didn't come back. Like as not, Ma took care of it, but I don't remember."
"Thank you, Miss Harris. You've helped a lot. I guess no one knows more about North Branch than you do."
"Humph," Augusta replied. "Don't tell you everything I know either." I was pleased with the information the children brought in. Surprisingly, there was little conflict in their reports. "The school had 2 teachers one year when my pa was here," George Eliot told us. "The big boys ran one of them off because he used a stick on them too much."
"No one would run you off, would they, Miss O'Dell?"
Edward asked.
"You'd stand right up to them."
He didn't seem to expect an answer, for which I was grateful. I was quite confident in my ability to manage my school without the use of physical force, but I was glad I had never been tested.
"Grandma Gage remembers clear back to 1816 when she started school here. She says there's been a Gage here ever since the school was built,"
Joel said.
"There's been an Elliot every year, too," Jamie contributed. "And they've all been boys. Every one of them."
"You mean there's never been any girls in your family?" Prudence demanded. "In 100 years?"
"My ma's a girl,"
Toby declared indignantly.
"Of course she is,"
I soothed him.
"Prudence just means that it's unusual to have a family of boys who have no sisters. That makes your family special."
Other people remembered interesting facts about the school and community, and little by little we began to see a good picture of the earlier years. When Mr. Williams brought out the records, I had fun going back over the attendance sheets.
"Jamie was right," I remarked to Len. "There's been at least one Elliot boy in school every year. It looks like a Gage every year, too."
"Joel's the last one for a while," Mrs. Williams put in. "They lost 2 boys a few years back in a flu epidemic, and Marcy left North Branch when she got married 5 years ago. She was named for Frank's oldest sister."
"I heard about her," I said. "Isn't she the one Augusta's brother was interested in?"
A slight more than interested, I'd say, Mrs. Williams replied. They were to be married as soon as he came back from the war.
How sad. Where is she now?
She died just a few months after he did. I know it was a tragedy that John Harris was killed, but Marcy wouldn't have been alive when he got home anyway. She was consumptive.
Augusta Harris finished school in 1843 and John in 1855. That was the last of the Harris family, too, wasn't it?
Mrs. Williams nodded. Too bad Augusta never married. Might have taken some of the edge off her disposition. I always thought she had an eye on Frank's uncle, but nothing came of it. October's weather did not improve as the month drew to a close. The wind howled around the schoolhouse, and rainstorms came unexpectedly. I guess Pa and I will have to bring wood in early this fall, George Eliot said to me one day as we shivered in the chill air. We don't usually start fires until November. I agreed. We would have a lot of sick children if they continued to sit around with wet feet in our cold room. At home, Augusta was concerned about the strong winds. That old tree by the well house is doing a lot of creaking. If it goes over, I hope it has the good sense to fall toward the well instead of the house. Maybe I'd better have Hiram Elliott take it down before a good storm gets it. I returned home from school on Thursday afternoon in the midst of a gale. Cold rain fell, and the wind seemed to come from all directions at once. Augusta held the door open for me. Mercy, she said. I thought you were going to be blown right on past the house. Don't know when I've seen a storm like this in October. Get those wet clothes off and come out by the fire.
You're right about that old tree,
I said when I came back into the kitchen.
It stopped creaking and started groaning. I'm sure it's going to fall over.
Best you stay in this part of the house tonight, Augusta said. If it comes this way, it will land on the roof over your room. I was only too glad to stay in the kitchen to work that evening. The fire roared in the stove, and as I grated papers and studied for the next day, I was thankful for a warm, safe place to live. When it was time for bed, I brought my blankets and pillow out to the couch. The wind continued to shriek around the corners of the house, and I fell asleep thinking that the little ones would probably not be able to get to school in the morning. The tree fell in the night. Thank the Lord, Augusta said when she found that the roof had not caved in. She peered out into the blackness from the window of my room. I can't see where it went. I'm just glad to know where it didn't go. The morning light revealed the well house tipped crazily toward the woods, the huge roots of the tree having pushed it casually out of the way. Augusta surveyed the mess glumly. I'll miss that old tree. I'd rather have the shade than the firewood. But it's an ill wind that blows no good. Hiram and George can make some money chopping it, and I'll have my woodshed full for the winter. She returned to the kitchen to get breakfast, and I began to prepare for school. Glancing out of the window, I caught a glimpse of Jamie and Toby Elliott climbing over the fallen tree, talking together excitedly. Rain was still falling steadily, but the boys were unaware of anything except the giant that towered 5 feet off the ground, even in its horizontal position. Their father and brother would undoubtedly still be working on it when the younger boys came home from school tonight. The wind had died down, and the sun was beginning to make a tentative appearance as I opened the schoolhouse. I was putting lessons on the board when the door burst open and Jamie Elliott raced to the front of the room. Did you hear the tree fall, Miss O'Dell? Aren't you glad it didn't hit the house? Do you want to see what we found?
Yes, and yes, I replied, laughing. Slow down, Jamie. One question at a time. Now, what did you find?
Jamie produced a sodden packet of papers from his pocket and placed it on the desk. It had some kind of a box around it when we picked it up, but that fell apart, he exclaimed. The papers got kind of wet and made the ink runny.
Where did you find them, Jamie? I asked.
They were under the corner of the well house that the tree tipped over, he replied. Actually, Toby found them. He wanted to take them home for Pa to see. Pa said we should have taken them right to Miss Harris, but Toby's too little to know any better.
You could have dropped them off there on the way to school, I suggested, not mentioning that he was not too little to know better.
Jamie nodded. We stopped at the house, but Miss Harris was gone, so we brought him to you. He started for the door, then called back. George won't be here today. He's working with Pa. Wish I was big enough to help on the cross saw. I wouldn't be here either." He disappeared through the door, and I decided to spread the soaked paper out on the desk to dry. The ink had smeared in many places, and I hoped they would be legible enough for Augusta to make out what they were. I didn't intend to read them, but a date at the top of the first page caught my attention. September 9th, 1861. That was the year the war between the states started, and Augusta had said that her brother had buried something. Perhaps this was it, although it certainly didn't look very valuable. Curiously, I scanned the paper and then, forgetting that this was none of my business, I went back and read it again. I, John Harris, on this 9th day of September, 1861, do will the property described in this deed to my wife, Marcy Gage Harris. In the event that I do not return, I request that Marcy Gage Harris provide a home for my mother, Julia Harris, for the remainder of her life, and for my sister, Augusta Harris, until she be married. There was more concerning the property, but I had seen enough. I was certain that Augusta knew nothing of this, since she had said that her brother had never married. I might as well not have been in school myself that day, for I paid scant attention to geography, math, or English. My mind whirled with uncertainty about what I must do. Should I just hand the papers to Augusta and not let on that I knew what was in them? Or should I hide them again and pretend they had never been found? The truth was, I had no desire to be a part of the scene when Augusta discovered she no longer had a legal claim to the Harris land. End of Chapter 5.